Welcome to the complete camera comparison between the brand new Google Pixel 4 XL, iPhone 11 Pro, and the Samsung Galaxy Note 10 Plus. And starting with video, it's good that all three phones can record 4K footage, but the Pixel can only do this at 30 frames per second versus 60 on the other two. You'll also notice dynamic range. Samsung struggles the most at keeping both the dark and the light areas well exposed. It's prone to overexposing highlights, but a little more worrying is the Pixel, which, if you look carefully, actually becomes grainy in the darker areas, even in this daytime scene. There's a good chance this will improve over time with future updates, but we're on the latest right now, and as it stands, Generally speaking, Samsung's video has the most saturated colors, and the iPhone's the best dynamic range. It's especially obvious if you look at the skies. You'll see that the bright spots on the Samsung, and occasionally the Pixel as well, they're a little bit overblown compared to the iPhone, which has them much darker and more controlled. The Note also has live focus video, the ability to artificially blur the background, as well as audio zoom, which can isolate audio from whatever you zoom in on. Good to have, but I wouldn't call either of them huge features. But what is significant is that both iPhone and Samsung come with ultra-wide cameras. This new Pixel phone doesn't, and I gotta say, the more I use ultra-wide cameras, the more I like them. And actually, between those two ultra-wide cameras, you might be able to see iPhone's dynamic range is greater. Every now and again with video, I also notice that the Pixel struggles to autofocus correctly, as you see here, but again, I'm putting this one down to something that'll be ironed out with future software. Hopefully. You can also in this frame see the differences between color profile on the iPhone and Samsung. Samsung opts for color, iPhone opts for neutrality. So far then, it's not looking great for Google, but one of the big things they did talk about with the Pixel 4 is nighttime photography, using their new and improved night sight feature. And so, as the light is just starting to dip, there's no significant difference, but as soon as it disappears, a few things to note. All three are pretty exceptional at nighttime. The fact that in the same shot we can see the dark, as well as what's happening inside this bright building, is impressive. And now that we're cropping in 10 times, you can probably also see the Pixel 4 shot is clean. iPhone's photo is a little grainy, and Samsung's a little softer, in part due to the aggressive noise reduction algorithm they use. The iPhone produces almost always the warmer, redder looking image, with that and the Samsung being a little more true to life than the Pixel. Anyways, you might have heard, Google has taken night mode a step further this time. Astrophotography mode, which means if you take the phone to an ultra-dark environment and you stick it on a tripod, it'll spend a few minutes capturing everything it can. So, of course, we had to test this, and to do that I headed to a night sky observation deck. And this photo here was the result. On first glance, it might look like the iPhone has captured more starlight, but it's only when we crop into this that the full picture emerges. The Note 10 Plus gets absolutely slaughtered in ultra-low light, whilst the iPhone can still output a really solid image, but it's not close. The lower the lighting, the further ahead Google pulls. The lack of the ultra-wide on the Google, it stings, but in really low light, it's not something you'd use anyway. These cameras just need more light to work properly, and when it comes to 2x zoom, they're pretty much on par. This was in a pitch black room. Thankfully, I can also say that Google and Samsung do a good job with flash illumination. The Samsung especially, it's got really good lighting evenness. On balance then, when taking photos in the dark, Google does a great job. It's just a shame that this advantage doesn't translate to video. If you look at the water in this scene, Apple is the only one that was able to properly expose the bright spots, and if we try with even less light, the trend is only exaggerated. Admittedly, this was taken in what was effectively blackness, but the iPhone still holds up. It's not a crisp and super sharp image, but at least it's noise-free. Samsung is after, and the Pixel is definitely in last place here. You've also, again, when it comes to video, got the advantage on Apple and Samsung with the ultra-wide camera, which the Pixel doesn't have, and in this scene in particular, you can see how iPhone's ultra-wide is wider than Samsung's. And if instead you wanted to zoom in, then mixed bag, really. The Pixel has a brighter result, but with iPhone, the finer details are a little bit more legible. Slow motion is an area that Samsung has traditionally won in, but we're getting to a stage where each phone has their own merits. All three can record continuous slow-mo up to 240 frames per second, and with this you can see a bit of a spectrum. In terms of the dynamic range preserved, it is Pixel on top, then iPhone 11 Pro, and then Samsung Galaxy Note 10 Plus. That said, the iPhone's advantage comes in two forms. It can A, record slow motion using the ultra-wide camera, which the other two can't, and can also take slow-fees or slow-mo on the front camera. A little bit less important than rear camera, I think, but still a feature. And then you've got Samsung, which, as you might already know, can record bursts of super slow motion at 960 frames per second, and just because of the sheer contrast with how slow this is versus normal video, it's an impressive effect. Now, we keep talking about video quality, but another really important aspect of it is stabilization. It's good on all three. If you're filming at full 4K resolution, it's good enough that you can walk normally and the bumpiness of footsteps on the ground is massively smoothed out. It won't quite feel like the phones are on a slider, but it's not far off. And if we dial that resolution down to 1080p, stabilization improves further. And if we pick up the pace and I start running, a few things. The Pixel becomes a little jumpy, iPhone is more stable but produces a bit of warping, and Samsung pulls ahead. Honestly, the stabilization is crazy. I was sprinting at this point. Alright, let's address the elephant in the room, arguably the most important factor when picking a smartphone camera: daytime photography. The past Pixel phones have been praised for their color processing, and so the good news is that the Pixel 4 is every bit as good, but the bad news is that it's barely better. It renders colors really well and produces punchy shots with what looks like a bit of extra sharpness and slightly exaggerated textures. However, whilst the dynamic range on this phone is very good, it's not as good as Apple and Samsung's best. You can see in any challenging scenario, those other two phones do a slightly better job at controlling bright spots, like the sun. Color-wise, iPhone looks the most natural, but I don't mind the extra bit of saturation that the Note adds to its photos. What the Pixel 4 does bring to the table is a 2x optical zoom camera, but the other two phones have one of these too. Google's supposed advantage comes from it using the software on top of this to stack images and bring out more detail when you're further away. Do the results speak for themselves? Not really. I'd say all three are about on par, with varying levels of sharpening being used. As when we were taking video, when you're taking photos, the ultra-wide cameras are just as dramatic, and it's just as painful that we don't have this feature on the Pixel. Samsung also has the advantage of being able to focus better on objects that are closer, macro shots, so to speak. With portraits, you're looking at three of the best phones for it. Each just has their own style, and so the winner is a little personal preference, but I would add, especially with the most recent camera update, Samsung's edge detection is fantastic. If you were just wondering about general camera detail, we can take a well-lit shot like this and crop in 20 times. Long story short, there isn't a whole lot in it. As for front cameras, I've always said, the Pixel phones, they're a little unflattering, and that remains true here. It kinda looks like the whole image is sharpened, including the details in my face. Then again, I've talked to a lot of people about their opinions on this front camera, and my takeaway was that it varies. There's a spectrum of people, from those who want a selfie to be as flattering as possible, to those who want it to be as realistic as possible, and so it's better if you look at these images and decide where you lie on that spectrum. Less negotiable though is that the Pixel and the iPhone's cameras are wider than Samsung's. If you switch to portrait mode on the front, similar story, and I'm personally a fan of the iPhone's end result. Plus, with video, the Pixel's redness becomes a little more apparent, and whilst the iPhone and Samsung can record at 4K resolution on the front, it is limited to 1080p, and Samsung also just takes it in terms of stabilization. And finally, audio quality. So to start with, you're hearing the microphone from the Pixel. Now the iPhone 11 Pro, let me know if you think that is better. And finally, the Samsung Galaxy Note 10 Plus. Bear this in mind, I think audio is a pretty important factor. So the conclusion here is a few things. I would expect the Pixel to improve a little in terms of software, and that phone does have some areas where it's got a clear advantage, like night photography, but on balance, I don't think it holds up to the best phone cameras out there. From the lack of the ultra-wide camera to the lackluster video quality on both the back and the front cameras, the Pixel feels a little outclassed compared to the other two. This is not to say it's a bad camera system, far from it, but it just doesn't feel like a huge leap forward in a year when that's exactly what the competition was doing. If you enjoyed this video, I made a video delving into the secrets of Apple as a company. I think you'll find it really interesting, so I'll leave that link from here. And with that being said, my name is Aaron, this is Mr. Who's the Boss, and I will catch you in the next one.